Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one we see a Russian counterattack against the Ukrainian attempt to cut the supplies to the Russian counteroffensive in the Kursk region. We also see some Russian advances in the Luhansk-Kharkiv direction in the Siversk section of the front line within the city of Toretsk and in the Pokrovsk and Kursk sections of the front line. Starting out in the north, the Russians have counterattacked the southern flank of Selydove, attempting to cut off the Ukrainian supplies by flanking them from the rear, and this would force the Ukrainians to withdraw from their newly acquired positions. This push by the Russians was captured with this footage here, showing the Ukrainians launching FPV drones on a Russian infantry fighting vehicle attempting to flank the Ukrainian positions. So you see there is an attempt by the Russians, although so far not very successful, to cut off the supplies to the Ukrainians pushing in the rest of Selydove and then to Klushkovo. In the Kupiansk section of the front line, the Russians launched an offensive across the Serbs River line from Mykolaivka towards Vuhledar, capturing the forest patches in the area and reaching the eastern outskirts of the settlement. The Russians are here fighting over the settlement, but the Ukrainians still are present within it, attempting to prevent a Russian takeover of the settlement. The Russians would here be looking to gain control over some of these settlements here east of Borova. The Russians have previously attempted such an operation where they launched assaults across the Serbs River line southwest of Selydove to capture some settlements here in the western bank. Managed to capture some of these settlements and reach Mykolaivka. However, the Ukrainians launched a counterattack, regaining control over the majority of these positions, leaving only a small area remaining under Russian control on the western bank of the Serbs River line, and not a single settlement. There is the settlement of Selydove, but there's not a single building within it, so I don't consider it a settlement. Therefore, we see that the Russians were kicked out and their offensive across the Serbs River line failed, but now we're seeing a second attempt further north. This attempt may be combined with further attempts across the area they previously attacked through to gain control over the village chain here east of Borova. There is at least 3 villages here in the direct east of Borova. If Russians gain control over these settlements, they'll have a proper foothold across the river line, and combined with the control over the eastern bank of the river line further north and south of this area, they'll have a strong flank in both of the directions north and south, allowing them to focus their forces in this direction and potentially launch an operation towards Borova. The Ukrainians have a lot of fortified positions in 2 separate lines east of Borova. They are located just outside the settlement and along the village chain located further away, and then there's the village chain further east, which acts as the first line of defense. Therefore, there are 3 lines of defense between the Russian positions and Borova, which would require a lot of forces for such an operation. But that's combined with the push towards Senkove near Peshane and Kupiansk in the north would be the 3rd and final crossing, which is a bridge across the Uskil River line. There is the first area to the very south, where there is only a small crossing near the settlement of Uskil near Isium. But other than that, all of the bridges would then be within close proximity to the Russian forces, as they would be looking to gain control over all 3 crossings in a simultaneous attack on all 3 positions, which would significantly limit the supplies of the Ukrainians if they launch such a coordinated operation to gain control over the eastern bank of the Uskil River line. So their objective could be to expand their control west of Serbs River line towards the Uskil River line to hit the 3 settlements and limit the supplies of the Ukrainian forces across the river line. In the Siversk direction north of Spirne, the Russians are pushing further towards the northern flank of Vuhledar, as well as the fortified positions of the Ukrainians. However, this could also be an attempt by the Russians to simply bypass it and launch an attack towards Kupiansk, where the objective would be to take advantage of the high ground. Looking at the topographic map, we see that the Russian positions along the first line southeast of Kupiansk is located at the heights of about 187 meters. Kupiansk itself is at 107 meters, that's an 80-meter advantage. The Ukrainian fortified positions are located here northwest of Vuhledar at the same height. Therefore, the Russians would have two objectives: attacking Kupiansk from the high ground, having the height advantage, which would improve their positions and give them an advantage, and to attack the Ukrainian fortified positions located in the heights northeast of Vyimka, northwest of Ivano-Darivka. So these would be the two targets. At the same time, the Ukrainians have fortified positions northeast of Kupiansk, also located at the heights. This overlooks the settlement and is a line between the Ukrainian positions within the settlement and the Russian positions just on the other side. So if the Russians gain control of these fortified positions and they combine it with an assault from the south, there is a river line moving through the north. We see it running through here. This would be an combined assault where the Russians can control with fortified positions northeast of Kupiansk, where they would cover the northeastern bank of the river line and combine it with an assault from the south, which would bypass the river line and have the height advantage to then gain control over the settlement. However, without control over the fortified positions located in the heights northwest of Ivano-Darivka, such control would not hold out for long, unless they launch a combined assault where they starve out the Ukrainians by hitting their supply lines, as they would have control over Vyimka to the southwest and Verkhnoukamyansk to the north. The reason I am talking about this is because according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russians have gained control over Verkhnoukamyansk. Yesterday they reported control over Vishneve. We see that they do not control it, but they managed to launch an assault, gaining access to it and fighting over it by gaining a foothold in the eastern outskirts of it. Therefore, if this is a repeat of such an announcement, the Russians would have reached the outskirts of Verkhnoukamyansk either by pushing north along the river line, gaining control over the fortified positions and gaining a foothold in the eastern parts, or flanking it from the south. With this geolocated footage confirming a Russian advance in the south, it could be in relation to that. In the direction of Toretsk, we see a Russian advance within the central parts of the city, where this geolocated footage confirms further Russian advances along the high-rise apartment complex area and the general residential area here north of the industrial zone. So the Russians continue their offensive operations in the central parts of the city and remain within control over the eastern parts of the high-rise apartment complex area in the central parts of the city. So we see continuous fights in the central parts of Toretsk. Further south here in the direction of Mykolaivka, the Russians have managed to advance further within the settlement, capturing parts of the fortified positions of the Ukrainians west of Krasny Yar and reaching the outskirts of the settlement. The Ukrainians have one more fortified positions here southwest of Mykolaivka and northwest of the settlement. Gaining control over both of these will allow the Russians to advance towards Rout through the railways and to support their operations in the direction of Sochia from yet another angle. So we see heavy fighting continues here to the north of Novrodivka, west of Rodivka, as the Russians continue offensive operations in the direction of Kursk. In the south of Selydove, the Russians continue advancing here in between Sokorine and Hirnik, where they've managed to gain control of the waste heap near the industrial area in between the two settlements. This allows the Russians to then break through the area in between to advance in the direction of Selydivka. The objective here is to limit the connection west of Hirnik and limit the withdrawal of Ukrainian soldiers from the forming pocket, to allow as many soldiers as possible to be caught within the encirclement if they reach the Vuhledar river line here further south. Therefore, we see continuous efforts by the Russians to advance in between the two settlements, not waiting for them to gain control of it. The Ukrainians do have this fortified position remaining under their control, which means that the Russians cannot advance further towards Mykolaivka or Novoselidivka yet, as they need full control over the railways to create a proper defensive line to push further. They need a lot of speed to cut off as many Ukrainian soldiers as possible, but that does not mean that they need reckless assaults where they do not have strong enough flanks. Further north, they would look to push further in the southern flank of Sokorine, further isolating the settlement and cutting it off from supplies to then gain control over the northwestern flank as well, and push further along the railways. In general, the Russians continue offensive operations across the eastern section of the front line. They attempt to improve their situation in the Kursk region as well. With regards to the recent capture of Vuhledar, there is this article by The Telegraph where it talks about how hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers were trapped in the city prior to the Russian capture of it. Some soldiers ended up being encircled, and as the Russians cleared it, they either fought till the end or surrendered. Others attempted to withdraw from the settlement, and according to the Telegraph, half of those didn't make it. This means that the casualties of the Ukrainians in this battle ended up being in the hundreds just from the withdrawal period itself. That is a part of the battle where the Russians really reaped the benefits of their siege and maneuvers. The Russian Battle of Vuhledar this time around was very well executed. It is completely incomparable to the prior assault of Vuhledar, which was a massive failure. I made an analysis of the failure of the Battle of Vuhledar a year and a half ago when the Russians launched that operation in the winter of 2023. This time around I'll make a video analyzing the success of the Russians, so make sure to stay tuned for that video, doing a military analysis of the battles and how the Russians, through the battles of Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and now Vuhledar, continuously improve their tactics and military capabilities to the point where the changes are so significant that they are incomparable to each other with the development that is happening at a rapid pace compared to the first year and a half of the conflict. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.